My name is Chris Zona. I'm a partner here at Mandelbaum Barrett. I'm in the litigation, white-collar criminal defense, as well as healthcare litigation. I'm here with one of our associates, John Burns, who's in our employment law section. And we're here to discuss a really interesting issue, John. And that is, if you're watching any college sports, especially college football, and we're just coming off bowl season, and, you know, big-time coaches like Nick Saban stepping down. And one thing that we hear over and over again is this new NIL controversy, I'll call it, because it has kind of taken over college sports and college athletics in general, and is constantly being discussed by, you know, longtime coaches who are trying to adjust to it, but as well as players as they're either transferring or choosing the school. So, John, could you talk to us a little bit about what exactly this NIL, I'll call it a controversy, is, and kind of when it came into fruition and started to make these waves in the NCAA?
Absolutely. So, you know, as many people know, NIL stands for name, image, and likeness, and essentially it's part of the NCAA's effort, and even a greater effort, to remedy years in which college athletes were denied any chance to really make any money, while the colleges themselves were making, you know, millions upon millions. Of course, for football in terms of bowl games, and for basketball and so on, in all these various tournaments. And, you know, we've seen that money filter through in many different ways. They're paying coaches millions of dollars to on the field, you know, revamps. But essentially, players kind of left out in the cold. So now we're at a point where these players are able to make money. And while it was encouraged by many at first, it's kind of taken a bit of a turn, which is what we're starting to see. One of the biggest things recently was a New York Times podcast on January 8th where an investigative reporter unveiled some information related to how this money is filtered to players. And while we've heard about some, you know, more prominent in the world of football, say, you know, Heisman winners maybe getting contracts and things like that, there's a more, you know, guarded and almost black market quality to other features of it, where these groups that get together, essentially called collectives, are funneling money to, well, I shouldn't say funnel, they're paying money to players to come to certain colleges. So the example that was given was University of Texas, which was always a big powerhouse team, you know, had a fair amount of down seasons for a while. And one thing that was almost immediately acknowledged and centered on was the fact that they didn't have enough linemen. So they started paying linemen in the amounts that this investigative reporter unveiled. It was $50,000 per lineman to come to the team and play. And obviously this past year they just made it to the Final Four in the new college football playoffs. So, you know, that was just an example of how quickly a team could try to turn something around, but also leads to various legal questions as to how that money's paid, who's collecting it, who's negotiating the payment, and so on and so forth.
So just for a little background, so myself, I played college football. I also coached college football, so I've been really on both sides of this NCAA discussion. That was a long time ago, far before NILs, nor was I quite good enough a player to get an NIL contract. However, you know, back in the day when I was either being recruited or I was going out and recruiting players, there were very strict rules. Extremely strict on what a player could receive. If we were going to have a lunch, what sorts of certain services can be at that lunch. And the NCAA, I mean, I recall taking, you know, 3-hour-long tests as a coach to make sure that I understood the NCAA compliance modules, what exactly was allowed to be provided, what wasn't, when a player became a recruit, and all that. How, in what you've looked at and kind of how you follow this issue, how is the NCAA kind of handling those sorts of extremely strict and rigid rules, which we were always very much against because they didn't make common sense, versus now where we are, which seems to be, as you called it, like these consortiums are getting together, or these collectives are getting together and paying players, you know, for their name, image and likeness, but it's not really being monitored by anyone from what it seems.
Yeah, from what we understand at this point is that it's still a bit of a Wild Wild West feature to it. That, you know, they actually are classified as charities, and, you know, one of the first questions in this report that we read was, well, who's receiving that charity, who's benefiting from it? You know, usually charities are geared towards people in need, and while you could obviously make an argument that some players that may come from, you know, poor backgrounds, you know, may need that money, you know, how is it fair that it's filtered through, you know, the lens of playing football for a certain team? A perfect example that they brought up was recently a player signed with a collective to play at the University of Florida, and then was quickly thereafter told that that collective ran out of money and could no longer play there. So who negotiated that? Was there a written contract involved? Does that player have any recourse against the collective? And, that's just one of, at this point, we'd have to think many examples where, there really isn't an oversight as to how this is being handled and, really who should be handling it.
Well, and this actually, John, as we were putting together this video and discussing it, one of the things that I brought up was similar to that, was that, hey, what happens when an NIL wants to make a decision that, hey, for whatever reason, we want to expand our market base or our market share in a certain region. Therefore, we need certain of our NIL players who are potentially well known to move to schools in that region. And at what point are we actually turning, we always loosely called them student athletes, but still collegiate level athletes into marketing tools? Well, we can argue they always were, but that are actually pawns in a larger game of commercializing college sports. And what, if anything, do you see in the works as being a way in which there's going to be pushback against this to kind of, I guess, re-regulate this?
Well, I think one of the issues that people are finding out now that is kind of come to light is the fact that college sports has always been romanticized in the fact that these players weren't playing for money; they were playing for the colors that they were wearing and the alumni, the students, faculty, and now you see that between transfer portal and the incentives for these collectives to bring students in, it becomes almost like more of a free agent market and removes much of that. Also, as you and I discussed earlier, the bowl games we saw this year, a lot of players were worried about playing in terms of getting injured and losing out on certain deals. So it does kind of make people who may have thought, well, these players are contributing so much to the school and not getting anything out of it, now it becomes almost so much of a business that the traditional aspect of college sports that people love the most, which was playing for your team and playing for your school, could be removed from that equation.
But at base, this can become an actual contract issue. If we're talking about, and obviously as litigators and as an employment litigator specifically, like this at base is really potentially a labor dispute, potentially with players who are now allowed to make a certain perk off of their name, image and likeness, if that is somehow going to be regulated or taken away. And then conversely, between the player and whoever is giving that NIL, if they're forcing me to transfer and I don't want to, is there a written agreement? So at base, this does become an employment matter, potentially a contract matter. And the reason I bring that up is because the team here at Mandelbaum Barrett handles both complex commercial litigation as well as a whole host, and John can tell you, a whole host of employment law matters, whether it's on behalf of large and small businesses, business owners, or employees who are kind of pushing back. So if you find yourself in a situation, maybe it isn't as the quarterback of Texas wanting to transfer an NIL contract, but a similar situation that you may have a contract dispute, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a wealth of knowledge and we're always happy and willing to be at the aid of our clients or our prospective clients.